At 20, Lucas Bennett inherited the one place everyone in town had forgotten: the old Ashcroft clock tower. His older sister inherited the family estate. His cousins divided the rental properties. His uncle received Grandpa Henry's antique collection. The lawyer cleared his throat. And to Lucas, he placed an old brass winding key onto the table. "Your grandfather leaves you Ashcroft clock tower." The room fell silent. Then someone laughed. "The abandoned tower?" His uncle smirked. "The town stopped using that clock decades ago." Another cousin leaned back. "You inherited 4 walls and a broken clock." Lucas quietly picked up the heavy brass key. It was unusually ornate. Tiny gears had been engraved into its handle. On one side were 4 simple words: "Every hour matters most." His grandfather had built clocks his entire life. He repaired watches, restored church bells, maintained public clocks throughout the county. Henry Bennett believed time wasn't measured by minutes. It was measured by what people chose to do with them. If he'd left Lucas the clock tower, there had to be a reason. 3 days later, Lucas drove into Ashcroft. The clock tower rose from the center of the old town square. Built from gray limestone nearly 150 years earlier, it stood above empty storefronts and quiet streets. The enormous clock faces had stopped years ago. Vines climbed halfway up the stone walls. Broken pigeons' nests filled the bell openings. Most people barely looked at it anymore. Lucas unlocked the heavy oak entrance. The smell of old wood, machine oil, and stone dust greeted him. A spiral staircase wrapped around the tower's interior. Above him, enormous iron gears filled the central shaft. Dust covered every surface. Yet every gear remained perfectly aligned. Grandpa Henry hadn't abandoned the clock. He had preserved it. Lucas rented a tiny apartment nearby. Every morning, he worked at a bicycle repair shop. Every afternoon, he climbed the tower. He polished brass gears, removed rust, replaced broken wooden steps, repaired cracked windows, carefully cleaned each enormous clock face one pane at a time. The work was slow, but every evening the tower looked a little more alive. One afternoon, an elderly woman climbed the stairs carrying a basket of sandwiches. "My name's Evelyn. You must be Henry's grandson." Lucas smiled. "You knew Grandpa?" She laughed softly. "I was town librarian for 42 years. I watched your grandfather wind this clock every Monday." She admired the freshly polished gears. "He always said the tower had 2 hearts." Lucas looked puzzled. 2. One everyone heard, and one only the patient would ever discover. "What does that mean?" She smiled. He never explained. He only repeated one sentence: "When time begins moving again, listen for the second bell." Lucas thought about those words for days. 2 hearts. Second bell. Nothing made sense. By late summer, the town squares slowly changed. People stopped to watch Lucas working high inside the tower. Children waved from below. Local shop owners thanked him. One newspaper published a story titled, "Young Man Restores Forgotten Landmark." Then expensive visitors began arriving. The first introduced himself as Victor Sloan. "We represent Ashcroft Redevelopment." He slowly circled the tower. "We'd like to purchase the property. It's not for sale. We're prepared to offer $12 million. Lucas almost laughed. "For a broken clock tower?" Victor nodded. "Cash." No, Victor wasn't upset. Instead, he asked a peculiar question. "Has the tower chimed yet?" Lucas frowned. "No." "I see." He handed Lucas a business card. "If that changes, call me first." Over the next month, 4 more buyers arrived. Each offered more money. 15 million, 18 million, 22 million. Every one of them asked exactly the same question. "Has the bell rung again?" Lucas knew then. They weren't interested in the building. They were waiting for something. Autumn arrived. The final repaired gear slid perfectly into place. Lucas climbed to the clock chamber carrying Grandpa Henry's brass key. The enormous mechanism looked magnificent. He slowly inserted the winding key into the main shaft. Click, click, click. The giant spring tightened. Then, the massive gears began turning. One after another. The minute hand moved. Then the hour hand. For the first time in nearly 30 years, Ashcroft Clock Tower came back to life. At exactly noon, the great bell rang. Its deep bronze sound echoed across the entire valley. People poured into the town square. Shopkeepers stepped outside. Children cheered. Old residents wiped away tears. Lucas smiled. Then, another sound answered. Not above him. Below him. A second bell. Lower. Deeper. hidden somewhere beneath the tower. He remembered Evelyn's words. Listen for the second bell. The sound echoed through the stone floor. Lucas searched the mechanism until he noticed something unusual. One enormous gear had begun turning in a direction opposite the others. Its center contained a perfectly shaped keyhole. He inserted Grandpa Henry's brass key. The gear rotated. Heavy stone groaned beneath his feet. A section of the floor slowly slid open. A narrow spiral staircase descended into darkness beneath the tower. Lantern in hand, Lucas carefully climbed down. The staircase ended before an elegant walnut door decorated with carved clocks from different centuries. Above the doorway were engraved the same 4 words found on Grandpa's key. Every hour matters most. The lock clicked open. Lucas entered. He froze. The underground chamber stretched beneath the entire town square. Hundreds of magnificent clocks filled the room. Tower clocks, pocket watches, marine chronometers, astronomical clocks, music boxes, intricate mechanical masterpieces from around the world. Every one had been perfectly preserved. At the center stood a beautiful oak workbench. Resting upon it was a sealed envelope. Written across the front in Grandpa Henry's unmistakable handwriting were 3 words. For Lucas only. He carefully opened it. The first sentence made him stop breathing. If you're reading this, then you restored the tower before asking what it was hiding. Lucas smiled. I guess he knew me. He continued reading. The clock tower isn't your inheritance. Suddenly, a powerful series of hidden gears engaged. An entire wall of antique clocks slowly swung outward like a giant door. Behind it, another hidden chamber began to reveal itself. The hidden wall swung completely open. Lucas stepped inside. Unlike the first chamber, this room wasn't filled with clocks. It was filled with letters. Thousands of them. Neatly arranged oak cabinets stretched from floor to ceiling. Each drawer labeled with a family name, a year, or a town. Maps covered one wall. Old photographs covered another. At the center stood a massive circular table carved to resemble a clock face. One final envelope rested on it. Across the front, Grandpa Henry had written, "Read this last." Lucas unfolded the letter. If you've reached this room, then you've already learned the first lesson. Time can preserve more than memories. It can preserve hope. He looked around the chamber again. What was all this? Henry's letter explained. For nearly 50 years, every time he traveled to repair a church clock, courthouse clock, school bell, or railway station clock, he quietly recorded the stories of the communities he visited. He interviewed elderly residents before their memories disappeared, collected family photographs, copied handwritten journals, preserved maps of neighborhoods before they changed, recorded the histories of local businesses, documented inventions created by forgotten craftsmen, gathered recipes, psalms, traditions, and oral histories that no museum had bothered to save. The clocks had simply given him a reason to travel. His true work had been preserving the lives that time usually erased. Lucas slowly opened one cabinet. Inside were hundreds of carefully labeled folders. Each contained letters from families thanking Henry for helping them recover pieces of their own history. Another cabinet held restored family trees. Another contained recorded interviews. Another preserved architectural drawings of buildings that no longer existed. Lucas realized the underground chamber wasn't a vault. It was the largest privately assembled archive of small-town history he had ever seen. Beneath the final letter rested a thick leather portfolio. He opened it. The first page read, "The Bennett Heritage Foundation. Current assets, $241,600,000. Lucas stared in disbelief. The foundation had grown through decades of historical preservation grants, museum partnerships, documentary licensing, educational publishing, carefully managed investments, and donations from families whose histories Henry had helped preserve. Every dollar had remained inside the foundation. The final legal clause explained everything. Control transfers only to the heir who restores Ashcroft Clock Tower before discovering what it protects. Lucas smiled. You planned every step. There was still one handwritten page remaining. My dear Lucas, people think I repaired clocks. I repaired connections. Every town has memories worth saving. Someone simply has to care before they're lost forever. Lucas remembered traveling with Grandpa as a child. Whenever a clock repair took longer than expected, Henry would spend hours talking with local residents. Back then, Lucas thought Grandpa simply enjoyed conversation. Now he understood. He had been rescuing history. The letter continued. A stopped clock can always move again. A forgotten story disappears forever. Never let that happen if you can help it. At the bottom were the same 4 words engraved on the brass key. Every hour matters most. Lucas folded the letter carefully. The following weeks brought historians, attorneys, archivists, preservation specialists, and foundation trustees to Ashcroft. Every document was authenticated. Every record proved genuine. Ownership of the foundation officially transferred to Lucas. News spread nationwide. Reporters expected another story about a young man unexpectedly inheriting hundreds of millions of dollars. Instead, Lucas surprised everyone. The money stays exactly where Grandpa intended. One reporter asked, "Then what will you do?" Lucas smiled. "We're going to save more stories." The restoration expanded. The upper floors of Ashcroft Clock Tower became a working museum where visitors watched the great mechanical clock operate once again. The underground archive became the Henry Bennett Center for Community History. Families traveled from across the country. Many arrived carrying faded photographs tucked into envelopes. Old journals, military letters, business records, childhood diaries. Lucas and his growing team carefully preserved every one of them. School children visited every week. Instead of simply learning dates from textbooks, they read the handwritten words of people who had actually lived in their own communities generations earlier. Evelyn visited often. One afternoon she stood beside Lucas as the noon bell echoed across the valley. "You finally found the tower's second heart." Lucas smiled. It wasn't another bell. No, it was the people whose stories were still beating. Evelyn nodded proudly. Henry would have liked that answer. Several years later, Victor Sloan returned. He walked through the beautifully restored clock tower, now filled with visitors. Children watched enormous brass gears slowly rotate overhead. Researchers carefully examined preserved documents below. Families smiled as they discovered ancestors they had never known. Victor unfolded one final purchase offer. $40 million. Lucas barely looked at it. "I'm not selling." Victor sighed. "You know, this land could become luxury apartments." Lucas quietly led him downstairs. An elderly woman sat reading a letter written by her grandfather during World War II. Across the room, 2 brothers embraced after discovering photographs of the bakery their great-grandparents had once owned. Nearby, a little girl listened with wide eyes as her grandfather pointed to a faded map and whispered, "That's where I was born." Lucas turned to Victor. "This is what the property is worth." Victor looked around. For the first time, he said nothing. He folded the offer back into his pocket and slowly walked away. Near the tower entrance, Lucas placed Grandpa Henry's brass winding key inside a glass display. Beside it rested the first letter, the foundation charter, and one simple inscription carved into polished walnut. Every hour matters most. Visitors often asked what priceless treasure had been hidden beneath Ashcroft Clock Tower. Some guessed rare clocks. Others guessed gold or jewels. Lucas always gave the same answer. The clocks were never the treasure. They were simply what kept time long enough for the real treasure to survive. People once laughed when a 20-year-old inherited an abandoned clock tower with silent bells and rusted gears. They saw an obsolete building. Lucas saw what his grandfather had always seen. Every hour offered another chance to preserve something that might otherwise disappear forever. The greatest legacy Henry Bennett left behind wasn't measured in money, gears, or even time. It was measured in the countless lives, memories, and stories that would now continue to inspire future generations. And every day at noon, when the great bell rang across Ashcroft once again, it reminded everyone who heard it that while time never stops moving, the best parts of our past never have to be left behind.